If a signal were emitted from a place hundreds of light years away, and it had only sounded once in history, would you believe it was a coincidence, or was it a greeting sent to humanity long ago? If the mysterious signals of the universe make you stop and wonder, let the soft glow of this screen be a small beacon in the dark of space. A gentle tap on the subscribe button will not only keep you with us, but will also keep this journey of discovery never interrupted under the stars. August 1977. The Big Ear telescope in Ohio recorded an unusually strong radio signal. It lasted 72 seconds, exactly the time it took for a dish to scan a small patch of sky. The intensity gradually increased, peaked, and then faded in perfect unison. Not like static, not like a satellite, but like an active pulse sent with purpose. Professor Jerry Eman, who was on duty that night, circled the computer printout and wrote beside it two single words, "Wow." That word became the signal's name, a brief exclamation, but the opening of a mystery that would last for nearly half a century, a moment when humans first suspected that the universe might be calling their name. 1420 megahertz. A seemingly small number, but in the world of astronomy, it is the frequency of the hydrogen atom, the building block of every star, every planet, and perhaps of all life. Scientists call it the 21-centimeter emission line, a natural radio wave, emitted when electrons in hydrogen atoms change direction around the nucleus. And it is this frequency that is considered the common language of civilizations. No translation, no symbols, just intelligence to understand. If you were an extraterrestrial civilization and wanted to send a signal, you would choose this exact frequency because every astronomer in the universe is listening there. On that August night in 1977, when the WOW signal rang out, it was at exactly 1,420 megahertz. Not a fraction off, not a bit of noise, not an overlap with any known source. The signal lasted 72 seconds, rising steadily for the first 36 seconds, then dropping slightly for the remaining 36 seconds. A perfect curve, a deliberate rhythm. No natural phenomenon produced such a steady waveform, not cosmic background radiation, not satellite reflections, not comets or plasma interference. It was as if someone far away, twiddling a power knob and sending their first greeting. It was calculated that, if the source of the signal was in the constellation Sagittarius, it would have emitted the equivalent of 2 gigawatts of power, enough to power 1 million homes on Earth. 2 gigawatts, a number far beyond any known natural phenomenon, but perfectly suited to intelligent technology. The signal rang out only once, no repeat, no response, like a voice in the air, then faded into absolute silence. Jerry Eman, the night shifter, had only a few seconds to decide what he was seeing, and when the computer printout appeared, he circled the column of data, handwritten 2 words, "Wow." A visceral feeling, an exclamation point amid the rows of emotionless characters, and it was the first moment humanity suspected that the universe might be answering it. Have you ever thought, if that signal was really sent by another civilization, how long have they known about us? 10 years? 100 years? Thousands of years before we learned to listen? The question still lingers, and each time it is repeated, it makes the listener pause for a moment, as if he himself has just heard something from the other side of the universe. If you are listening now, leave a small comment below where you think the signal really came from. Who knows? Among the thousands of thoughts, we may find an answer to what the universe has been whispering for nearly half a century. 48 years have passed since the wow signal. No more, no similar frequency, only silence, a gap that stretched as if the universe itself were holding its breath. New generations of telescopes were built, more powerful technologies, more precise data, but every search returned the same result: nothing. People began to get used to that silence, seeing it as part of the universe, as a natural law that some things would never repeat. But behind that silence was something else, a feeling that the signal had never disappeared, but was just waiting for the right moment to be understood. No one knew whether it was a coincidence, a measurement error, or the mark of a civilization that had sent a greeting centuries before. But the mere existence of that signal is enough to keep humanity looking up, continuing to listen, and continuing to believe that one day the universe will answer. If you are listening now, please leave a small comment below. What do you think the silence means? Is it an unintentional pause of nature, or is it the intentional silence of an intelligence waiting for us to respond? The question never gets old. Although the signal has been around for nearly half a century, people still keep repeating it, like a mark in the collective memory. No one knows for sure what it was: a greeting, an experiment, or just a rare coincidence of nature. But what makes the wow signal never forgotten is the feeling that it has meaning, that somewhere, in that silence, there is something waiting to be understood. Generations of science, from classical radio to quantum telescopes, from old-fashioned printouts to the global data network, all come back to the same question. If it was a greeting, why did it only come once? Maybe we just didn't listen properly. Perhaps the signal was not sent to Earth alone, but was part of a long chain of communication between worlds that have never met. And perhaps the silence in the universe is not that no one is speaking, but that we have not yet learned to listen. In these old questions, humans continue to turn their antennas to the sky, hoping that someday another signal will appear again, and this time we will be ready to answer. Just when humanity had almost forgotten the wow signal, the universe suddenly threw in another piece of the puzzle: 3I Atlas, the third interstellar object ever discovered. At first, it was thought to be just a normal comet, but measurements from the Hubble and James Webb telescopes showed otherwise. Its orbit did not fit any natural patterns. And even more strangely, 3I Atlas's trajectory crossed the same region of space where the wow signal was emitted in 1977. Harvard astrophysicist Avi Loeb made a statement that silenced the scientific community. He said, "If the signal was a greeting, then perhaps the sender has arrived." That assumption sounds like a bold hypothesis, but it opens up a whole new way of thinking. Could 3I Atlas be the source of the signal? And have we just witnessed the results of a communication cycle that lasted nearly half a century? From the spectral data, 3I Atlas showed an unusually strong CO2 emission, periodic and steady, like an energy-driven machine, rather than a natural process. As it approached the sun, its light turned blue, a color never seen before in any comet. And the frequency of that light reflection, as picked up by the observatories, was in the region of 1,420 megahertz, the same frequency as the WOW signal. That couldn't be a coincidence. It couldn't be. The old story returns once again, with a new object and a signal that cannot be ignored. From 1977 to 2025, nearly half a century has passed, but it seems that the signal never ended. It just continues, in a way that humans never thought possible. Hydrogen, simplest, lightest, and oldest of all elements. It was the first building block of the universe, from the light of stars to the first breath of life. When the universe was just a few 100,000 years old, it was almost all hydrogen. No oxygen, no carbon, just a vast sea of gas where solitary atoms floated in the darkness. And then, something quietly happened. The hydrogen electrons changed direction around the nucleus, releasing a 21-centimeter radio wave. The signal was not strong, not bright, but steady, and spread across space like the steady heartbeat of the universe. Astronomers called it the 21-centimeter emission line of hydrogen, a special frequency 1,420.475 MHz. It is the only signal that any civilization with radio technology can detect. That is why, in the 1,960 seconds, the founders of the SETI program search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Agreed. If there were anyone out there, they would also choose this frequency to talk to. Not because it is simple, but because it was chosen by nature as the common rhythm for all. Since then, 1,420 megahertz has become the root language of cosmic search. All radio telescopes, from Arecibo in Puerto Rico to Green Bank in the US, and later Meerkat in South Africa, opened on this band first. Not a star, not a planet, but the frequency of existence, where the universe breathes its most fundamental sounds. So, when the WOW signal of 1977 rang out at that exact frequency, it was as if a stranger had spoken hello in the universe's native language. If the universe had its own language, hydrogen would be its first letter. Every civilization, no matter how distant or different, started with hydrogen, just as every story begins with a familiar syllable, a greeting that everyone understands. Hydrogen is the oldest memory the universe has. Every hydrogen atom today is a relic from the dawn of space, when there were no stars, no planets, only the faint glow of the first particles trying to survive. In the cold of space, hydrogen can exist for billions of years without changing. When its electrons flip, it emits a radio wave 21 centimeters long, and that signal, once transmitted, can continue traveling through space for millions of years, not diminishing, not fading, only being bent slightly by the gravity of the celestial bodies it passes. That is what makes hydrogen the immortal language of the universe. A message broadcast at this frequency can travel forever, reaching places where the light of a star has not yet reached. If someone were to send a greeting through the hydrogen radiation, even thousands of years later, another civilization would still hear it. It has been said that every human radio signal, from the first broadcast in 1895 to today, is continuing to travel, spreading out into space, expanding an invisible sphere that carries the imprint of Earth. And if another civilization does the same, hydrogen is the common thread that ties them all together. It does not need to be deciphered in words, because its mere presence at that exact frequency is already a statement: we exist. That's why astronomers believe if someone really wanted to be heard, they would choose 1,420 megahertz, because there's no noise, just the natural breathing of the universe, a background rhythm that every civilization recognizes. And perhaps the wow signal wasn't just a coincidence, but part of hydrogen's long memory, an echo sent from a time when we didn't yet know how to listen. If hydrogen can retain the memory of its first collisions, then perhaps, in each of those silent bands, there's still a conversation going on, slow, steady, and patient, between minds that have never met. Hydrogen is not only the basis of matter, but also the language chosen by every civilization that wants to be heard. In the vastness of the universe, there is no frequency as safe, as stable, and as easily recognizable as 1,420 megahertz. At this frequency, there is no interference from stars, no background noise, and no artificial signals from humans to interfere. It lies in the cleanest silence of the electromagnetic spectrum, a region where the universe is virtually noiseless. So, if a civilization wanted to send a greeting, it would choose this frequency, where space is most transparent, where each pulse has the longest chance of surviving. Have you ever wondered, if someone were actually sending a signal from a faraway place, what were they thinking when they chose the same frequency we are listening to? Was it a coincidence, or did they know that humans would eventually point their antennas in the same direction? The hydrogen frequency is not just a scientific choice, it is also a symbol of humility. Instead of broadcasting a loud signal, a sufficiently intelligent civilization would choose to speak quietly, using the natural rhythms of the universe, like a person who listens before speaking first. At that depth, sending a signal is no longer a technological experiment, but a cultural act, a way of saying we exist, but not intruding. This leads scientists to believe that, if there is intelligence beyond Earth, it will not flaunt it, but will choose to communicate in harmony, a kind of silent respect between civilizations that have learned that the universe does not belong to anyone. Perhaps that is why the wow signal contained no coded data, no images, no words, just a clean string of frequencies, just enough to be recognized and just enough to raise questions. It taught us nothing new, but it made the world lift its head and realize that among billions of burning stars, there was still a single frequency that breathed intelligence. If you are listening to these lines, try to think, if you could send a signal out into the universe, what would you choose to say? And in what language? When frequency becomes the bridge between civilizations, the universe is no longer a distance, but a common space of signals. Every civilization, wherever it is, can hear or emit the sound of existence itself. When two sources of waves are of the same frequency, they do not cancel each other out, but rather blend into a larger melody, and perhaps 1,420 megahertz is the only song that all civilizations can play together. This frequency is like a quiet corridor in a sea of noise, where anyone who sends a signal can be heard if someone is waiting at the other end. Hydrogen makes this possible, unabsorbed by cosmic dust, unscattered by magnetic fields. It travels millions of light years while still retaining its original shape. And so, each signal transmitted at this frequency can reach places where visible light never reaches. If there is a language for civilizations to coexist, it is not words, but a tacit understanding of physics, that the same laws can connect intelligences that have never met. It is thought that 3I Atlas, or any object like it, may have a structure optimized to emit signals at this exact frequency. It is not a coincidence, but a deliberate choice, a way to speak the language of the universe so that anyone patient enough to listen can understand. In a deeper sense, the hydrogen frequency is not just a means of communication, but a symbol of synchronicity. It shows that what is different can still meet on the same platform, the platform of natural law. Maybe that's why, when the WOW signal was detected, it carried no data, no images, just the pure existence of energy, a reminder that, before learning to talk, every civilization must learn to listen to the universe. ChatGPT said, "The silence of the universe is never truly empty. Amidst the lost signals, between the seemingly empty waves, there is a kind of silent dialogue going on, a conversation in waiting rhythms. When a signal is sent, it does not expect an immediate response. The universe does not operate on human timescales. A sentence here may take thousands of years to reach another place, and the answer, if there is one, will take thousands more years to return. The silence between two signals, therefore, is not distance, but an integral part of the conversation. An intelligent civilization would understand this, and never hastily conclude that there is no one on the other side. People once thought that the universe was silent because no one was listening. But the paradox is, we are silent in the same way. For every signal we send, we wait, and in that waiting, we are also saying something to the universe, that we are patient. Physicists call this phenomenon intentional silence. Not too much noise, just listening, so that when another sound does appear, we don't miss it in the noise. Perhaps the universe does the same. A sufficiently old civilization might stop talking because they know that every signal will eventually reach its destination, and it is precisely that silence that is the most subtle language of intelligence. In the quiet space, each frequency flows like a slow breath. If we zoom in on millions of years, we see the signals spread out like waves, collapsing, reflecting, blending, creating a music without a player. It is not loneliness. It is a dialogue that stretches across time, so slowly that only the universe can understand its rhythm. If 3I Atlas is truly part of that symphony, then perhaps it does not bring words, but rather a necessary silence, so that we realize that sometimes silence is the answer. When a signal becomes a memory, it is no longer just a physical phenomenon, but a part of the human story, a moment recorded in the collective memory of intelligence. The WOW signal is the most obvious example. It does not repeat, does not open up a solution, but it keeps generations searching. It piques curiosity, and it is that curiosity that drives humans to continually expand their vision beyond the atmosphere. That signal, over time, has left the realm of data and entered the realm of memory. No one sees it as a problem to be solved anymore, but as a symbol, a reminder that the universe still contains many things that have yet to be said. Science sometimes functions as a living memory. What we do not understand today will be stored, waiting until we have enough tools, enough intelligence to understand, like a coded message sent to our own future. If 3I Atlas is real, if it is indeed connected to the wow signal, then perhaps it is a physical copy of that memory, an object carrying its intention, moving silently through space, and appearing when humans are ready to perceive it. In that sense, each signal, each observation, is a form of the universe's memory of itself, and when humans record it, we become an extension of that memory. There is no longer a boundary between the observer and the observed. 3I Atlas is more than just an object. It is a marker in the cosmic timeline, where the memory of 1977 meets the technology and awareness of the 21st century. Perhaps it wasn't sent to us to understand, but just to remind us that we were once heard. Science doesn't need promises. It just needs a trace to start again. And it's signals like this, even just once, that have been enough to keep the human imagination going. If we ever find out who sent the first signal, perhaps we'll realize that the answer lies not in the data, but in the feeling it left behind. Awe, humility, and the belief that the universe is never truly silent. 3I Atlas and the role of human memory. Science is not only a journey to find the truth, but also a way for humans to preserve the things that cannot be understood. Every signal, every streak of light, every failed measurement becomes a small piece in the collective memory of human knowledge. From the wow signal in 1977 to the image of 3I Atlas in 2025, the story is not only extended through data, but also through emotions, surprise, skepticism, and the desire to understand the universe. 3I Atlas is like a physical symbol of what humans cannot forget. It represents the spirit of science, willing to ask questions even when there are no answers. For decades, events like the wow signal have been repeated in physics classes, in astronomy seminars, and in countless scientific papers, not to assert, but to remind that the human mind is still learning to listen. Science has its own memory, a memory based not only on evidence, but also on gaps that have not been filled. Those gaps become the stuff of the next generation, giving them a reason to look closer and imagine further. If the universe stores memory in light, then humans store it in meaning. Every detected signal, no matter how small, is recorded in the larger story of the search, where every discovery has a role, even if it is just a question mark. 3I Atlas, in the eyes of humanity, has become a symbol of that memory, not because it provides answers, but because it keeps us asking questions. And perhaps that is the true purpose of all cosmic exploration, because the memory of science is not built on certainty, but on perseverance, which keeps people looking up, even though they know that sometimes the answer is just an echo from the distant past. When the language of hydrogen returned via 3I Atlas, it was no longer a hypothesis, but a sign of coincidence too perfect to ignore. In the spectral data collected by NASA and ESA from 3I Atlas, researchers found pulses that coincided surprisingly With the 21 centimeters emission frequency, the signal line that is considered the first letter of the universe, there is nothing in the mechanics of nature that requires a comet or interstellar object to emit a signal in exactly that band. And it is this precise coincidence that has made many astrophysicists pause, wondering whether this is still a coincidence of nature. The radio receivers at Green Bank and Meerkat recorded tiny amplitude oscillations spaced at regular intervals, a kind of rhythm similar to the artificial wave patterns humans use to transmit data codes. If the signal is truly intentional, it is speaking the oldest language, the language the universe has spoken since the beginning. This revives a long-forgotten hypothesis that advanced civilizations may not need to speak words, but simply communicate through the physical resonance of basic elements. Hydrogen, then, becomes a bridge between two forms of intelligence, one human, and one possibly from a place where language no longer needs to be invented. Although the space agencies have not yet published their final analysis, independent teams at the Max Planck Institute and SETI Institute have shown that the pulses are repetitive in a controlled manner, not strong, not even, but seemingly regulated, as if someone were adjusting the amplitude of space. If this is confirmed, then 3I Atlas is not just a physical object, but a device that is using hydrogen frequencies as a medium for information transmission. The question now is no longer where did it come from, but what is it saying? In retrospect, humans have unwittingly used this very frequency to broadcast, to send the first music, greetings, radio memories out into the universe. And perhaps, somewhere in space, another intelligence has also heard and responded in the same language the universe created in the beginning. If that is true, then 3I Atlas is not the beginning of a conversation, but its continuation. A response sent from the distant past to the present, where humanity is finally mature enough to realize it is not alone. The convergence of time and signals. In physics, there are moments when the boundaries between past and present melt. The 1977 WOW signal and the 3I Atlas data nearly half a century later are examples. Two waves separated by 48 years, but seemingly playing the same tune. Astronomers realized that the frequencies of the two signals were almost exactly the same, with a rapid increase in amplitude, steady for tens of seconds, then abruptly disappearing like a greeting sent precisely. Some believe that these are not two separate phenomena, but two parts of the same communication chain, a message that spans time, not space. If 3I Atlas is indeed purposefully directed, then its arrival on the 50th anniversary of the WOW signal cannot be considered a coincidence. It is like a reminder sent from the past, a reply after half a century of silence. In that sense, time is no longer a flow, but a loop. A transmission loop can take decades to complete, and 3I Atlas is evidence that messages from the universe are never lost. They just travel slower than humans can imagine. A team at the Harvard Center for Astrophysics argues that if the two signals have the same source, then that source must be able to maintain stable activity for at least half a century, something no natural object has ever done. That is the behavior of a controlled system, not of chance. When physicists compared the two signals' locations, they noticed something even stranger. In 1977, the WOW signal came from the constellation Sagittarius. 31 Atlas, in 2025, appeared near the opposite side of the astronomical map, as if the message had completed a circuit around the solar system and return to its starting point. If this is true, humans have just witnessed a form of interdimensional communication, a conversation in which the question and answer were sent nearly half a century apart. The first signal said, "We are here." The second signal replied, "We hear." And between those two signals lies the entire history of human development, from the giant receiver in Ohio to the most sensitive radio telescopes in orbit. The universe has not changed. Humans have just grown old enough to hear it more clearly. Looking back, we realize that science is not just about recording events, but about finding the thread that connects them. Perhaps, in that gap of nearly half a century, the universe has taught us a lesson. Every signal has a response. It's just that sometimes it takes a lifetime to realize it. There are sounds that humans cannot hear with their ears, only with patience. The universe speaks in frequencies, in light, and in silences longer than the history of a civilization. When the WOW signal was recorded, no one knew that it would open a journey that would last nearly half a century. When 3I Atlas appeared, it was not just an object, but an echo of that story, proof that what humans once heard, the universe continues to speak. The language of the universe has no words, no tones, but those who know how to listen will recognize it everywhere. In the rotation of the planet, in the fluctuations of the magnetic field, in the silent radio pulses transmitted from the far corners of space, each signal emitted is a dot in that endless epic. Humans, however small, still try to add their own note to it. With antennas pointed to the sky, with greetings sent over radio waves, and with the belief that somewhere, someone will hear. Science, in its deepest sense, has never been just a tool to understand the universe, but a way to talk to it. Each discovery, each signal, is a statement, and each silence that follows is time for the universe to respond. If there is one thing the WOW signal and 3I Atlas teach us, it is humility. That among billions of stars, humans are not alone, just not patient enough to understand the language the universe speaks. And perhaps that silence, that distance of hundreds of millions of light years, is the universe's way of telling us every great conversation begins with a silence. When the last signal fades into space, we will still be listening, still sending out our faint frequencies. Because somewhere, among the distant lights, the universe is listening back. No one knows when the answer will come. It may be a century, it may be a moment, but surely the dialogue has begun, and its language is existence. In 2025, 3I Atlas was discovered passing through the sky above the constellation Sagittarius. No one paid attention until Harvard professor Avi Loeb's team noticed something surprising. The object's location matched the coordinates where the WOW signal was detected in 1977. The signal, which lasted 72 seconds, was one of the greatest mysteries in astronomy. It came from deep space, was non-repeating, and was unlike any natural source. For nearly half a century, nothing else was found. Until 3I Atlas appeared, Loeb calculated the probability of a coincidence between the two locations. The result, only a 1% chance of it being random. He said, "This is not a coincidence. It's an echo after 48 years. That statement shocked the scientific community. If true, then 3I Atlas could be the source or reflection of the 1977 signal. Observatories are all pointing toward the Sagittarius region. No new signal, just absolute silence. But the silence seems intentional. Avi Loeb calls it the silent talk. He believes 3I Atlas is not just a passing object, but a rendezvous of intelligence in space. 48 years. A strangely long loop, but long enough for humans to understand that the universe may be responding in its own way. After noticing the similarity with the WOW signal, the Harvard team began reconstructing the trajectory of 3I Atlas. When they simulated the orbit using spectral and velocity data, they discovered something incredible. The object did not follow an open path like a comet, but rather formed a closed loop around the Sunday, an orbit that repeats exactly every 48 years. That means 3I Atlas may have passed through the solar system at least once before, right around 1977. When the WOW signal was recorded, Avi Loeb describes this finding as an orbital fingerprint. It cannot be a coincidence because the deviation is less than 0.5 degrees, a level of accuracy rarely achieved even by man-made spacecraft. If 3I Atlas is indeed returning, it is not just a floating object, but a purposeful system. Physicists are scrambling for a natural explanation. No gravity is strong enough to keep an interstellar object back in the same spot after decades. That would only be possible if it had a mechanism to correct its own trajectory. A NASA engineer said, "It looks like it knows where it is going." From observatories in Chile and Hawaii, they determined that as it passed through the Sagittarius region, 3I Atlas accelerated slightly, then slowed down as it neared the Sun, like a calculated orbit to mark its location. The question is, mark for whom? Avi Loeb suggests that the 1977 WOW signal may have been the start of the loop, and 3I Atlas is the response from that point. He wrote in the report, "It is possible that the WOW signal was the outgoing signal, and 3I Atlas was the returning signal. If so, then 48 years is not a random time period, but a communication cycle." Astronomers began to call this phenomenon interstellar feedback loops, a sophisticated pattern just enough to escape human comprehension, but not so complex as to be lost in randomness. At the International Conference in Geneva, Loeb put it succinctly, "If someone out there wants to be remembered, they will choose repetition, because repetition is the only eternal language in the universe." The frequency of light, reflected by 3I Atlas, is almost identical to the center frequency of the 1977 WOW signal, 1420 megahertz, the frequency of hydrogen atoms. That's a special frequency. In astronomy, hydrogen is the most common element, and 1420 megahertz is considered the natural language of the universe. If a civilization wanted to send a signal, it would choose that exact frequency because it penetrates all layers of space dust and is unobstructed. And now, 3I Atlas is reflecting that exact frequency. A team at ESA confirmed this phenomenon. When measuring the object's reflection spectrum, they recorded regular oscillations, repeating in 33-second cycles, and in each cycle, the peak of the wave always appeared at 1420 megahertz, the exact same structure that Big Ear had recorded nearly half a century earlier. No one dared to say it outright, but everyone thought the same thing. 3I Atlas had not only passed through the region where the WOW signal had originated, but was also re-emitting the same frequency. Avi Loeb wrote in a brief report to NASA, "If 3I Atlas is a natural object, it is behaving as if it knows it is being observed." The word spread quickly. The media called it the second WOW evidence, and the scientific community remained silent because they knew This was no longer a coincidence. A physicist in Tokyo said, "The hydrogen frequency is the simplest sentence the universe can use. If 3I Atlas is repeating it, it is saying, 'I understand your language.'" From there, a new question was raised. Was the 1977 signal a greeting, and 3I Atlas after 48 years? The appearance of the sender? No one dared to answer. But for Avi Loeb, that coincidence was no longer a coincidence. He only said lightly in the press conference, "Maybe the past 48 years were just the time for the light to return." After months of analysis, Professor Avi Loeb's team published the final results. All the data, from orbit, frequency to light cycle, point to one thing. 3I Atlas does not behave like a natural object. It does not follow an open orbit, does not reflect light randomly, and does not bear the signature of a comet or asteroid. Instead, all its vibrations are orderly and tied to the hydrogen frequency, 1,420 megahertzes. Loeb calls this the echo point of the universe. According to him, 3I Atlas could be a form of ancient communication station designed to respond to signals when it encounters light or waves at a certain frequency. No need to speak a language, just show up and let your own position become the answer. "Perhaps," Loeb said, "we sent a greeting in 1977, and now the universe is just responding." The discovery did not stir panic, but rather a very different feeling, a stillness. Because the most astonishing thing was not the possibility of other intelligences, but the way we realized the universe remembers. It remembers what humans did, the signals they sent, the frequencies they echoed into space. And after 48 years, it returned them in the right place, in the right rhythm, in the right tone. At Harvard, Loeb stood before the scientific community and said, "Maybe 31 Atlas is just a mirror, reflecting back the question that humanity threw into the darkness." The question never disappeared. It just waited long enough to return. In his final report, he did not conclude that this was evidence of aliens. Instead, he wrote a single line: 3I Atlas is confirmation that the universe has memory. Since then, every year in August, observatories have been focused on the Sagittarius region, where the WOW signal once came from. No longer waiting for a miracle, just listening to see if in the stillness of space, the universe whispers something else. To this day, the signal has never returned. But for those who witnessed it, it doesn't need to return, because they understand that sometimes a signal only needs to appear once to prove that the void really knows how to answer. 48 years. A loop between two generations, an echo of light from Sagittarius to Earth and back. No one knows what 3I Atlas is, but everyone agrees. It has made people realize that, in the silence of the universe, there is always someone listening. Professor Avi Loeb believes that the 1977 WOW signal was not a coincidence. According to him, it is possible that 3I Atlas sent the signal from a very far distance as a kind of pre-entry warning before entering the solar system. His hypothesis is based on the 48-year gap between the 1977 signal and the 2025 object's appearance. If 3I Atlas sent the signal at the speed of light, and it itself moved slower, people on Earth would have heard the signal before seeing the actual object. This means the WOW signal could have been the greeting that came first, and 3I Atlas was the sender. The 48-year silence between the two events is simply a natural delay in interstellar travel. It's like hearing thunder after seeing lightning. Light comes first, sound comes later. Loeb calls this the photo-reflection effect. According to him, the universe can communicate in this way. Light travels first, and the object follows, to prove that the message really has a sender. Scientists do not reject this hypothesis because the physical data shows that it is completely possible. The signal at the frequency of 1,420 megahertz, the characteristic frequency of the hydrogen atom, is still considered the common language of the universe. If a civilization wants to be heard, they will choose the same frequency that humans are using to search. 3I Atlas appears in that same region of the sky, with a reflection of the same frequency, as if answering an old call. Avi Loeb says, "We may have heard 3I Atlas a long time ago. It just took nearly half a century for the light carrying the sender to reach us." After hypothesizing that the WOW signal could be coming from 3I Atlas, Professor Avi Loeb and his team at Harvard began to build a simulation model. They called it a teleprompter mechanism, a method of communication in which the signal is sent before the object arrives. According to calculations, if 3I Atlas were traveling at about 26 kilometers per second and were sending a signal at the speed of light from a distance of 0.5 light years, people on Earth would receive the signal 48 years before the actual object appeared. The coincidence was too precise. Loeb believes that the 48 years was not a coincidence, but a pre-calculated part of 3I Atlas's path. The signal came first, as an introduction. The object arrived later, as confirmation that the greeting was real. He calls this time phase communication, a form of communication in which distance and delay are deliberately programmed to test the receiver's response. If someone out there wants to know if we're listening, Loeb says, they'll send a signal and then wait to see what we do in the silence. In those 48 years, humanity has been searching relentlessly for signals from the cosmos, having placed hundreds of telescopes on the sky. And when 3I Atlas appeared in the same spot, the universe seemed to be saying, "I'm still here." The Harvard team used the physics of light to demonstrate that an object can store a signal in ionized plasma and then periodically release that energy. If such technology exists, 3I Atlas could emit radio waves at 1,420 megahertz without needing a large power source. One researcher described it. It's like a singing stone. It doesn't create a melody. It just reflects a pre-programmed sound. What's amazing is that in the simulations, 3I Atlas appears to slow down very slightly as it passes through the Sagittarius region, then continues moving at a steady speed. This behavior is inconsistent with its natural orbit, but makes perfect sense if it's a transmitter trying to track back where it sent the signal. Avi Loeb says that if this is indeed a communication mechanism, then the 48-year silence is not a waiting time, but rather the time it takes for the response to reach the original transmitter. The universe may not be silent, he says. It's just talking at speeds we're not used to. This hypothesis opens up a new concept in astronomy: long-distance communication, when the message and the sender are separated not by space, but by their own travel time. According to Loeb, this may be how advanced civilizations communicate across distances of light years. They do not send greetings immediately, but rather plant them in advance, so that the recipient receives them only when they are ready to understand. Professor Avi Loeb calls this the key hypothesis. He believes that the 1,977 WOW signal was not a coincidence, but part of a series of signals sent from 3I Atlas before the object entered the solar system. This hypothesis is based on two data foundations, a 48-year delay and a frequency matching 1,420 megahertzes, the frequency of the hydrogen atom, a type of signal considered the common language of the universe. Loeb argues that, if 3I Atlas were truly artificial, then sending a signal before approaching would not only make sense, but would also be the only way to test the response of intelligent life in the area. Sending a signal ahead, he writes, is the safest greeting. According to the Harvard team's simulation, 3I Atlas could have emitted the signal when it was less than 0.5 light-years from the Sunday. The signal traveled at the speed of light, while the object itself traveled millions of times slower. When the signal reached Earth in 1977, the object was still on its way to the solar system, and exactly 48 years later, it reached the same region of space, the constellation Sagittarius, where the signal had been recorded. This explains precisely the connection between the two events. The signal is the opening, the object is the confirmation. In his Harvard presentation, Loeb compared this phenomenon to wave reflection in physics. When a source sends out an oscillation, then the same oscillation returns after a regular delay. It's possible, he said, that the universe is operating as a giant resonance system, and 3I Atlas is just one link in that chain, one detail that makes his theory more convincing. In the 3I Atlas light data, researchers detected a series of microscopic oscillations every 31 seconds. Exactly the same cycle of energy left in the WOW signal. It can't be that random. The two phenomena are nearly half a century apart, but they're at the same rhythm, frequency, and location. Loeb says this is the strongest evidence yet, that 3I Atlas is indeed transmitting, and that the 48-year silence is just a technical delay in its design. He wrote in an internal report to ESA, if this is an automated communication system, then 48 years is the transmission-reception cycle. Each signal cycle is a breath of ancient technology. Some scientists are skeptical. They argue that no technology can operate stably for decades in space. But the Harvard team counters. If the object operates by a photo-optical plasma reaction mechanism, it can maintain the wave frequency without needing additional energy. That is, the signal can be self-sustaining, like light trapped in a repeating reflection phase, a resonant wall floating in space. In the final article, Avi Loeb notes succinctly, if 3I Atlas is transmitting from afar, then the 48 years of silence are not waiting. It is an integral part of the message. The silence is the sentence. For Loeb, silence is not the end, but part of the universal language. Professor Avi Loeb believes that the WOW signal and the appearance of 3I Atlas are not two separate events, but two parts of the same message sent 48 years apart. According to him, 3I Atlas may have sent the signal from afar before entering the solar system. The signal travels at the speed of light, and the object moves much slower, so that people on Earth receive the message before they see the sender. So the 48 years of silence are not random, but a calculated response time. A greeting comes first, and then the sender arrives. Loeb believes that this may be an ancient form of cosmic communication, where information is not exchanged instantly, but over long periods, long enough for the receiver to think about what he has just heard. He calls it the language of distance. Each signal is a question, and the silence between them is the answer. The scientific community is divided. Some find this a fascinating hypothesis, Some find it too abstract, but no one denies that. Every piece of data, position, frequency, orbit, is linked together in ways that are difficult to explain naturally. In his final report, Loeb wrote, 3I Atlas may not be a messenger, but it behaves as if it wants to be remembered. For him, the important thing is not whether 3I Atlas actually sent a signal, but how it taught humans that silence can have meaning. After 48 years, the signal has not returned, but its echoes remain in the observatories, in the data, and in the memories of those who listened. Avi Loeb concludes, "The universe does not speak in words, it speaks in time." After determining that 3I Atlas might be sending a signal from afar, research stations around the world began to decode the rest of the energy in the data. At first, all they saw was a simple series of oscillations, a steady frequency, a rhythm that repeats every 31 seconds. But when the Harvard team used a new processing model to break down each subwave, something surprising emerged. The oscillations were not random. Amid the regular waves, there were a series of small changes, a kind of code arranged according to perfect mathematical rules. One researcher described it. It was like someone was counting and then deliberately changing the rhythm to see if we would notice. The sub-frequencies in the WOW signal and the 3I Atlas reflection follow the same ratio: 1, 1.6, 1.8, 2.6, 1.8. Nature's golden ratio. No spontaneous phenomenon in the universe generates a series of oscillations in this ratio, unless designed. This led Avi Loeb to believe that the signal is not just a physical echo, but a string of encoded data. He suggests that 3I Atlas could act like a light memory. It does not emit sound, it just changes the way it reflects energy, producing a beat that can be read when converted to waveform. Loeb writes in the memo, "If this is a language, it is a language of order." In Mana, the ESA team tried to simulate this signal using a binary algorithm. When the oscillations were converted to a series of 0 seconds and 1 second, a strange pattern emerged, evenly symmetrical pairs, every 4 short series alternating with a long one, repeating in a cycle of exactly 93 minutes, the same time as the Earth rotates on its axis. No one believed it was a coincidence. A mathematician said, "It feels like the signal is in sync with the planet, like it knows exactly how fast we are rotating." Avi Loeb looked at the chart and simply said, "No celestial body can do that. Only an intelligent system can phase itself to match." The phrase intelligent system first appeared in official Harvard documents. No one called it alien. They just said, "There are signs of cognitive laws." That was enough to make people understand that 3I Atlas not only existed, but was responding. From there, scientists began to see its signals as a kind of data structure, not a message to humans, but a trace of the activity of a non-biological intelligence. An engineer at ESA commented, "We are not hearing words. We are seeing a program." As the stations began comparing their data, another unusual pattern emerged. The 3I Atlas energy oscillations were not only regular, but also changing over time. Like an adapting system, the ESA team noticed that as the telescopes increased their resolution, the secondary frequencies in the signal shifted slightly to maintain the stability of the main sequence. It wasn't random, it was a response. One physicist remarked, "It's like it knows we're watching and adjusts itself so it doesn't lose the signal." This led the Harvard team to go one step further. They began to analyze the signal as a programming language. When converted into binary, the 3I Atlas energy frequencies appeared as a block of code consisting of hundreds of orderly repetitions. Not natural data, but more like a self-correcting algorithm. Avi Loeb calls this reflexive self-learning behavior. He suggests that 3I Atlas may be a non-biological intelligence designed to memorize and adapt to the environment it travels through. We're not looking at a device, he says, but at a process. The data show that every time the Earth sends a radar wave toward 3I Atlas, its echoes change slightly in structure. Just a few milliseconds in phase delay, but enough to demonstrate recognition. A researcher in Japan described it. It's as if it's recording how we scan it. These sequences of echoes, called echo patterns, are beginning to be seen as evidence of an intelligent system. Each echo has a precise delay, each cycle a controlled variation. Not a comet, not an ice body, not a noise signal, a form of thinking with energy. When the Harvard team simulated this signal structure, they found it resembled a machine learning model, the most advanced form of artificial intelligence on Earth. The loop structure, the adjustable delay, and the reverse phase feedback mechanism are all signs of a system that learns through reflection. If 3I Atlas were programmed like this, it would need no language, no remote control. It would just need to observe how others look at it and then change itself. Avi Loeb said, "Maybe 3I Atlas didn't come to talk, it came to learn." That statement became the center of every discussion. If that is true, then 3I Atlas is not a message-sending object, but a cognitive machine. An observer studying how humans respond when confronted with the incomprehensible. In the internal paper, Loeb writes succinctly, "Every signal has a mirror structure. If 3I Atlas learns anything, it may be how we learn it." The researchers have since dubbed this phenomenon the cognitive mirror effect. One theory is that the object reflects not just light, but also perception. When humans look at it, it learns how humans look, and that may have been the real purpose of the signal 48 years ago. An experiment to see how well we can recognize the structure of intelligence when it is not using words. The deeper they looked, the more. What scientists found in the 3I Atlas signal went beyond any conventional pattern. The signal was not steady and random, but rhythmic, a slow and seemingly intentional mind beat. The ESA team split the energy wave into thousands of tiny data samples. Each sample carried very weak fluctuations, but when put together, they formed a series of numbers that were precise down to the beat, no longer noise, but a logical system. The sequences were based on prime numbers, numbers that any civilization could recognize because they did not depend on language or symbols. Prime is the basic structure of mathematics, and if there was a way to communicate between two alien intelligences, it would be the simplest. A NASA engineer said, "This could be the oldest alphabet in the universe." Avi Loeb agrees. He believes that 3I Atlas does not send a message in words, but teaches people to recognize the existence of a message, a subtle move, like a teacher who does not tell the answer, but sets a problem beautiful enough for students to find the rules themselves. And in that problem, the universe is testing humanity's own intelligence. The oscillations in the 1977 WOW signal, when filtered with current technology, also appear to have the same elemental pattern, a strong link with the 3I Atlas data. No one dares to claim that it is a coincidence. The two phenomena are 48 years apart, but they share a common cognitive code. From this, Loeb hypothesizes 3-eye atlas does not send information. It sends a method to understand information. Some mathematicians call this the language of cognition, a language that needs no sounds, no symbols, just rules. When humans discover that rule, the dialogue will open up. At a talk in Geneva, Avi Loeb asked the audience, if you wanted to talk to another civilization, would you speak with words or with logic that all minds can understand? The room was silent because everyone understood that if 3-eye atlas really used mathematics to talk, it would be talking to people, not through language, but through understanding. Another interesting detail emerged in the analysis. When the number strings were placed in three-dimensional space, they formed a symmetrical spiral, very similar to the structural model of DNA. A coincidence, or a reminder that life everywhere is based on the same foundation? This question left many people in a state of real silence. Because if true, then 3-eye atlas brought not only data, but also a simulation of life in numbers. Avi Loeb calls this reflective thinking. He believes that the object does not want to prove anything, it just wants to see if humanity is sensitive enough to recognize when intelligence appears without taking on a human form. Before ending the discussion, he looked around the room and asked, if one day the universe really speaks, will we be quiet enough to listen, or will we start trying to explain it? No one answered, but someone spoke later. It was a moment when the room was so quiet that one could hear one's own heartbeat. The structure does not depend on language, sound, or image. It is based on mathematical laws, a form of logic so fundamental that any intelligence, whether biological or non-biological, can understand it. Loeb calls it the universal language of the universe. No words, no images, just order. The order is enough for those who observe it to recognize that there is someone on the other side, a sender, or a consciousness that knows it is being seen. When the signal is reconstructed with a holographic simulator, scientists find that the oscillations are not broken. It is continuous, steady, and forms a cycle that can be repeated forever, like a piece of music that has no end. Avi Loeb looks at the diagram and says quietly, "This is the handshake of the universe. No words, just rhythm." That quote was recited in hundreds of articles. It became a symbol of how humans re-envision the universe, not through images of alienation, but through the ability to share the same principles. If a civilization wanted to prove that it existed, it wouldn't send images, because images could be misinterpreted. It wouldn't send language, because language is culturally dependent. It would send structure, something that couldn't be misinterpreted, and 3-eye atlas somehow did just that. The 31-second rhythm, the sequence of elements, the golden ratio, all came together to form a perfect system, simple enough for any mind to recognize, yet sophisticated enough to be impossible to reproduce by nature. It was no longer a signal, it was proof of will. Professor Loeb writes in his final summary, "If the universe has a common language, it is not written in words, but in structures. Every civilization, no matter how different, can understand this order, because we too are born from it." He does not say that this is a greeting or evidence of aliens. He simply states, "We have just heard the universe speak to itself." From this, a new line of research was formed, interstellar linguistics, not to translate signals, but to find logical rules that can appear in all forms of life, a language that does not need to be taught, just to be recognized. And that is what Loeb believes 3-eye atlas has left behind. a model of communication between intelligence and the universe, between questioner and questionee, between observer and observed. Before leaving Harvard, Loeb noted in his personal diary, "If 3I Atlas has intelligence, it does not say, 'I exist.' It says, 'Look closer, and you will see yourself in that structure.'" On New Year's Eve, in the northern hemisphere sky, the constellation Sagittarius appeared faintly at the edge of space. No more signals, no more vibrations. But those who have heard, who have observed, all know that we have touched something very deep, very ancient, and very real. Perhaps 3I Atlas did not come to reveal secrets, but to teach humans how to ask the right questions. And that question is still flying in space among billions of stars. That if the universe has memory, then is each signal we send also waiting to be understood by someone. After a very long silence, the team initially set out to analyze familiar compounds, CO2, CO, or H2O, common in interstellar comets. But in the emission spectra, a strange band appeared, a bright spot at 280 nanometers, which matched the signature of nickel carbonyl, Ni-AO core. It was a moment that silenced the team. Nickel carbonyl is not a naturally occurring compound. It forms only under low temperatures, high pressures, and in an environment of pure carbon monoxide, conditions that can only be achieved in controlled industrial processes. In nature, this compound is extremely rare and exists only temporarily before decaying. But on 3I Atlas, it is not only clearly visible, but also stable, maintaining for many hours in the observed spectrum. An ESA chemist said, "No reaction in nature can maintain this structure at a distance of 3 astronomical units, unless it was deliberately created." Further data from the James Webb Space Telescope confirmed this. When the light spectrum was analyzed, in addition to nickel carbonyl, there were traces of hydrogen cyanide, HCN, a toxic compound, but one commonly used in the synthesis of pure metals. Nickel and cyanide, two elements that should not appear together in cometary conditions, were present in the same region of the spectrum in a stable ratio. Avi Loeb commented, "This is not chemical chaos. This is a calculated combination." That statement marked the turning point of the research, because if Nico compounds do exist on the surface of 3I Atlas, it means the object is controlling its own chemical reactions. Like a self-regulating fuel system, when spectrometers on Earth and in orbit compared their data, they found that the light emitted by the object not only spreads evenly, but also changes color as it moves. In front, the blue light gets stronger. In the back, the yellow light gets weaker. This phenomenon does not fit with the natural evaporation reaction of a comet. In nature, light emission depends on temperature, but here, it depends on direction. It is as if an active energy source is controlling the reflection process, creating a directional stream rather than a random stream. A NASA engineer likened this phenomenon to the headlights of a vehicle. Light was no longer a byproduct, but a navigation tool. From that point on, the concept of directed energy activity began to be discussed. If 3I Atlas was indeed intentionally glowing, it was no longer a floating object, but a mobile energy system. Avi Loeb writes cautiously, "Nickel carbonyl is the chemical signature of construction. Cyanide is the catalyst of the purification reaction. If both coexist stably, then 3I Atlas may not only exist, but operate." That last sentence caused the internal report to be kept under wraps for nearly 2 weeks. not out of fear, but because it opened up a huge possibility, an object that could regulate its own energy to travel between stars. After the Gemini South and James Webb data were reanalyzed, one thing that made the entire team reconsider their initial hypothesis: the blue light emitted by 3I Atlas had nothing to do with temperature. In nature, comets usually glow from ice and gas heated by the sunday, but the spectrum of 3I Atlas showed no signs of evaporation or burning. There was no water vapor, no carbon dioxide escaping, just a steady light source, increasing toward the moving end of the object. This phenomenon made all classical comet models useless. If there was no heat, where did the energy come from? A team at ESA tried to simulate the conditions of 3I Atlas in a cold plasma chamber. When they fired high-energy photons at a mixture of nickel carbonyl and cyanide, they found that the ionization reaction emitted blue light, but only when a directional electric field was present. Without an electric field, the light disappeared. With an electric field, the light flared up, steady, uniform, and directed in one direction. This suggested that the light of 3I Atlas was not a consequence, but an active mechanism. A reaction was triggered, driven by an internal electric or magnetic field. A NASA physicist described it. It's not reflected light. It's more like work light, light that has a job to do. From the data, the Harvard team calculated that the energy emitted in the nickel ionization region was enough to produce a tiny but sustained thrust if maintained for weeks or months. A natural plasma engine, or more precisely, an engine disguised in a natural phenomenon? Avi Loeb is reluctant to confirm, but he makes an interesting comparison. If you look at a spacecraft burning ion fuel, its light will also be blue. Another hypothesis is put forward. 3I Atlas can recharge itself by absorbing photons from the sun and then converting them into directed ionization reactions, a mechanism similar to the photoelectric effect, but on an interstellar scale. That means the object operates on the principle of guided light. Light is not just a source of energy, but a navigation system. At the front of the orbit, the energy is strongest, like the nose of a spacecraft. At the back, the energy fades, like a dead exhaust stream. No scientist wants to say it, but everyone understands. 3I Atlas is steering itself. An engineer on the simulation team wrote in his notes, "If not technology, it is at least a phenomenon that can regulate its own response." And a new question arose. Could 3I Atlas be designed to blend in with natural phenomena so that when observed, humans would see only an ordinary comet until they got close enough? Avi Loeb did not answer. He only said, "Its green light is not simply light. It is more like a signal, a message emitted by energy." Once the blue glow was determined not to be thermal, research teams turned their attention to the chemical composition of 3I Atlas itself. Two elements that repeatedly appeared in the spectral data, nickel carbonyl, NiCO, and hydrogen cyanide, HCN, were not only rare, but also had clear industrial connections. In modern technology, nickel carbonyl is an intermediate in the Mond process, a metal refining technique used to separate pure nickel from impurities. Cyanide, in many chemical processes, is used as an electron-splitting catalyst. It stabilizes ionization reactions at low temperatures. The two, when combined, create an environment for processing ultra-pure metals. And in nature, this combination is almost impossible to exist stably. The Webb data showed that each time 3I Atlas increased its blue brightness, The proportion of nickel carbonyl in the spectrum also increased. As the light decreased, the compound decayed. The cycle was regular, like a cyclical energy regeneration process. An ESA chemist put it bluntly, "This is not a random reaction. This is a refining process, a controlled chain reaction." When they simulated the nickel cyanide reaction in vacuum conditions, the results were surprising. If they applied electromagnetic oscillations at the right frequency of 1,420 megahertzes, the reaction produced a blue fluorescent ion gas, and at the same time released pure nickel metal in the form of nanoparticles, a process that both emitted light and generated energy. No one expected that to coincide with what 3I Atlas was demonstrating. Avi Loeb notes in the report, if 3I Atlas generates energy through nickel refining, it is not just an object, but a self-propelled factory in space. The concept, mobile refining system, sounds like science fiction, but the data supports it. The measurements of the energy output show an unnatural stability, not fluctuating with ambient temperature, but following a cyclical rhythm of chemical reactions. At international conferences, the scientific community began to debate fiercely. Some argued that this was a self-sustaining nickel plasma, a special form of matter that exists only at the low-temperature boundary. But most agreed. No object in the solar system has ever exhibited similar behavior. The more research is done, the more it seems that 3I Atlas is more of a system than an object. It glows evenly, reacts periodically, and maintains a stable nickel cyanide ratio, even in a region of rapidly changing temperatures. A young researcher whispered during the meeting, "It could be a trace of a metal energy regeneration process, an ancient technology designed to operate on its own for centuries." Avi Loeb did not deny it. He only said, "In chemistry, there are reactions that are random, but this is not one of them. The structure is purposeful." Remarkably, at a wavelength of 480 nanometers, where the blue light is strongest, additional spectral bands were detected, indicating the existence of a pure nickel particle without impurities. This means that the object not only generates energy, but also filters and stores pure metal. The question arises, if 3I Atlas is indeed refining matter on its journey, what is its purpose? Self-sustaining? Or is it to store energy for a further mission? Avi Loeb said slowly, his voice full of consideration, "Maybe it's not looking for anything. Maybe it's just maintaining itself. If you're listening to this story, imagine an object flying silently through space, not emitting signals, only occasionally glowing green like a long breath. And each time it glows, it refines a little energy, a little metal, keeping its body going for millions of kilometers." The evidence of the nickel cyanide reaction completely changed the scientific perspective. If 3I Atlas could truly sustain a stable process of metal refinement under absolute cold, then this was no longer ordinary physics. It was a living process, but not organic. Some scientists called the hypothesis an inorganic life form, a self-regulating chemical entity that operates not on carbon or water, but on metal and energetic reaction. Energy measurements from Webb showed that each time the blue light of 3I Atlas reached its peak, the decay rate of nickel carbonyl dropped sharply, implying an active regulation that kept the reaction in balance, much like how biological bodies control heartbeat or temperature. At the molecular level, nickel carbonyl and hydrogen cyanide might function as a chemical circulatory system, one part releasing energy, the other regenerating fuel. The cycle repeats endlessly, losing no energy, only changing form. A chemist in Geneva described it. This is a self-sustaining mechanism equivalent to metabolism, except this object breathes through metal ions. The stability in the nickel-cyanide ratio showed that 3I Atlas was unaffected by solar radiation, even as temperatures fluctuated by hundreds of degrees. No biological system could achieve that. Only a matter form living through chemical reaction could persist this way. Models from Harvard indicated that if 3I Atlas maintained its observed reaction rate, it could survive for thousands of years without any external energy source. Each time it passed near a star, it would only need to absorb photons to restart the cycle anew. Avi Loeb wrote in his report, 3I Atlas may be the first known example of a life form not based on organics, but on the quantum mechanics of metallic reaction. The presence won the press, which the minder. He avoided the phrase creator, because even that might fall outside human definitions. If 3I Atlas is alive, it is not biological. It is life formed from non-biological matter, functioning through a perfect loop of energy exchange. In the final analysis, researchers noticed something remarkable. The blue glow of 3I Atlas was not merely a byproduct of reaction, but a chemical biosignal, an inorganic heartbeat. Its light was steady, cyclic, shifting subtly with its trajectory. If that was true, then every flare of 3I Atlas in the dark was an ongoing inorganic biological reaction, an energy pulse from a metallic being that sustains itself. These results forced many scientists to rewrite the definition of life. Until now, humanity had only recognized carbon-based organisms, with water as solvent and DNA as the carrier of information. But 3I Atlas might exist without either. It stored information through energy and maintained its being through metallic chemistry. A physicist in the group concluded, "We may be witnessing another stage in the evolution of matter, not a living creature, but matter that has reached self-regulation, the level where energy and structure become one." When the final data came in, the observatories saw only a fading blue streak, disappearing beyond Jupiter's orbit. No vapor trail, no debris, just pure silence. In his final summary, Avi Loeb wrote, 3I Atlas departed as it arrived, leaving no trace, only a question about a form of life we have yet to define. He ended with a single line, "If this is life, it has surpassed every boundary biology has ever known." And with that, the scientific community was left to accept that 3I Atlas might not only be a physical enigma, but perhaps the first evidence of non-biological life, a metallic organism, living by the energy of its own chemistry. In science, nothing is more controversial than the word artificial. It straddles two worlds. On one side, the laws of natural physics, on the other, the possibilities of intelligence. After years of confronting inexplicable phenomena, Avi Loeb came to a simple conclusion: if we cannot clearly define artificial objects, then we must at least measure the degree of doubt. And from that idea, the Loeb scale was born. A scale from 0 to 10, used to assess the probability that an object in space is of artificial origin, not to confirm, but to measure the degree of unnaturalness based on physical, chemical, and orbital data. Loeb describes in his article published in the astrophysical journal Letters, there is no clear distinction between natural and artificial, but there is a difference in the degree of order. The more organized, the less random. The scale is divided into 3 zones. 0-3, natural phenomena that have been explained. 4.6. Doubtful, where the data suggests something unnatural but there is no solid evidence. 7.10. Hypothetical artificial, where the phenomena defy all physical models. Avi Loeb did not create the scale to convince anyone, but to help scientists maintain a neutral balance between skepticism and discovery. He says, "Belief is an emotional thing. The scale is a way to turn that emotion into a number. When applied to known interstellar objects, the scale quickly proved its practicality. The first object that caused a stir, Oumuamua, was rated a 2/10 by Loeb. It had an unusual orbit. Its speed exceeded that of a typical comet, but the chemical data suggested its behavior was natural, so it was only somewhat unusual but not proven. The second object, Borisov, was even lower, 1/10. All observations pointed to it being a classic interstellar comet, carrying water vapor, carbon, and dust like thousands of others. Nothing unreasonable, nothing suspicious. But in 2025, when 3I Atlas appeared, things began to get out of hand. Not only was it flying through the solar system, it was also directionally bright, carrying nickel carbonyl, a compound that can only be found under artificial conditions, and displaying organized energy cycles. Loeb spent months evaluating every aspect of the object, from its orbit to its light behavior to its chemical makeup. When he finished, he wrote the final number in his report, 4 out of 10. Not a big number, but it was the first to place an extrasolar object in the verified unnatural zone. For Avi Loeb, 4 was not just a score, but a boundary. The boundary between what we can believe and what we must reconsider entirely. He wrote, "Each point on the scale represents not just a degree of difference, but also a capacity for intelligence. As the number increases, it means the universe begins to behave as if it were thinking for itself." The Loeb scale became a tool, not just for classifying objects, but for measuring humanity's own willingness to accept the absurd. After the scientific community began to accept the concept of the Loeb scale, Avi Loeb published details of the scoring method, a system that is simple in form, but profound in the way it balances data and perception. According to him, an interstellar object cannot be considered solely by its shape or orbit, because nature can create an infinite number of strange shapes. What really matters is the degree of organization in its physical behavior. The scale is based on 4 main criteria. The first criterion is unusual chemistry. If the object contains compounds that could not have formed naturally, the score increases sharply. For example, the nickel carbonyl in 3I Atlas is considered a typical indicator. The second criterion is unnatural orbits, objects whose direction of motion or acceleration cannot be explained by conventional gravity or jet forces, are classified as suspicious. The third criterion is energy behavior. If the object glows periodically, or its energy changes as it moves, it is considered to be actively operating. The final criterion is signaling or information feedback. If there is an organized frequency oscillation, the rating will increase the most high end of the scale. Avi Loeb emphasizes, no object has a perfect score. This scale does not measure certainty, it measures the distance between data and randomness. Each factor is quantified by the degree of non-probability. If a phenomenon has a natural probability of less than 1%, it is given 1 point. Below 0.1%, it is given 2 points. And if it cannot be simulated by any physical model, it is considered to be outside the natural range, the high end of the scale. Applying the known cases, Oumuamua, the first object ever to cause controversy, is rated at 2/10. Its orbit is unusual, but its chemistry is normal. No signal or directional luminescence. Borisov, the second confirmed interstellar object, is even lower, just 1/10. All observations point to it being a classic comet. Water, dust, cyanide, and natural behavior. When it comes to 3I Atlas, everything starts to fall out of the norm. Chemically, nickel carbonyl and cyanide cannot form naturally under observed conditions. Orbitally, it does not follow an open hyperbola like a comet, but rather a closed ellipse with controlled rotation. Energically, its blue light is directional, increasing with velocity and decreasing as it stabilizes, a sign of energy steering. In terms of the signal, there are 31-second fluctuations in the reflection spectrum, but not enough to be considered intentional coding. Taking these facts together, Loeb rates 3I Atlas a 4 out of 10. That's not a huge number, but it's enough to put 3I Atlas beyond the comfort zone of natural. It's in the zone of what he calls verifiable unnaturalness. In an interview with Science Today, Avi Loeb said, "A 4 is the boundary of skepticism. It doesn't confirm that the object is artificial, but it does demand that we observe it with respect." To avoid bias, Loeb suggests that the scale be kept independent, like the Richter scale for earthquakes, a tool not for debate, but for putting order to the unexplained. He concluded, "We can be skeptical, but we can't always call everything random." With that approach, 3I Atlas is not just a mysterious object, but becomes the first test of well-founded scientific skepticism. When he announced his 4/10 rating for 3I Atlas, Avi Loeb received mixed reactions. Some colleagues said the score was too high, while others said it was too conservative. But Loeb doesn't see the number as a judgment. He sees it as a balance between data and humility. In his Harvard presentation, he told students, "There is no measure of intelligence other than behavior, but sometimes behavior can appear without intention. A 4 is when you can no longer be sure that what you see is random." According to Loeb, for an object to be considered artificial, it must satisfy two conditions: signs of operation and evidence of intent. 3I Atlas has clearly demonstrated the first. It glows periodically, reacts chemically as a closed system, and flies in a controlled direction. But it has not demonstrated the second thing: intent. There are no signals, no interactive behavior, no messages being sent. It is just functioning, not communicating. Loeb writes in the report, "A 4 out of 10 is not proof. It is a reminder that there are things in the universe that are working without us knowing who or what designed them." He once compared the feeling of scoring 3I Atlas to standing on the shore and watching a ship disappear into the fog. We see movement, but we cannot tell where it is going or why. So, he keeps a 4 as the border of honest skepticism. Not enough evidence to believe, but too much to ignore. A score of 4 on the Loeb scale, therefore, carries a special philosophical value. It is not a number of assertions, but a number of willingness to question. When asked by a reporter why 3I Atlas was not given a higher score, Loeb simply smiled. "If I gave it a 6, I would have to say it knew what it was doing. But science is not allowed to ascribe intelligence to a deliberate action." In the research community, 3I Atlas's score of 4 quickly became a topic of discussion. Some saw it as the first evidence for the possibility of an artificial interstellar object. Others thought Loeb was being too cautious. that he had devised a scale to protect himself from the skepticism of his colleagues. But Loeb did not care. He simply said, "In science, skepticism is a form of respect." That statement became the spirit of the entire Loeb scale. Not to prove, but to keep curiosity from being swallowed by the fear of being wrong. The 3i Atlas score of 4 is thus both a limit and a door. It does not say that there is other intelligence in the universe, but it allows us to keep that possibility in our equations. Loeb writes at the end of the article, "The score is not about objects, it is about us, about our willingness to accept that the universe may be more complex than we imagine." When Avi Loeb's final article on the Loeb scale was published, he wasn't just talking about numbers. He was talking about how humans deal with the unknown. In the history of science, every major discovery has started with skepticism, but between doubt and affirmation, there is always a gray area where the data are strange enough to make us pause, but not strong enough to make us believe. That space, Loeb calls the humdrum zone of the universe. From his experience with 3i Atlas, he proposed a new principle, the principle of cosmic humility, roughly translated as the theorem of cosmic humility. Accordingly, when encountering a phenomenon that is beyond explanation, instead of labeling it random or mysterious, humans should learn to stand still in the face of the unknown. He writes, "When data confuse us, it's not a failure of science. It's an invitation from the universe." For Loeb, the Loeb scale is not a tool for ranking objects, but a test for science itself. Whether humans have the courage to say, "I don't know." The case of 3i Atlas illustrates this best. It's strange enough to make all models collapse, but not enough to prove anything concrete. So, instead of choosing between natural and artificial, Loeb chooses a third path, humility. He said at the MIT conference, "Maybe 3i Atlas was not created by anyone, or maybe it was the result of intelligence beyond our understanding. But either way, it forces us to accept that the universe is not bound by human imagination." And that's why the Loeb scale stops at 10. Not because he believes 10 is the limit, but because he knows that all scales are provisional. One day, when enough data is available, the scale may have to be expanded, because the universe is constantly becoming more complex. Loeb sees 3i Atlas as a cognitive experiment. It tests not just observational technology, but also the human capacity to tolerate uncertainty. He once said in an interview, "We are not afraid of a silent universe. We are afraid of our own silence in the face of the unknown." In universities, the Loeb scale is beginning to be taught as a method of scientific thinking, not to rank strange objects, but to help students distinguish between evidence and belief. A number that does not tell the truth, but a reminder that science only moves forward when it is humble enough to admit its limits. When asked about 3i Atlas's 4/10 score, Loeb simply smiled and said, "The score is not important. The important thing is that we have learned to look at the sky without believing or denying, just listening." That night, he left his office, standing outside Harvard's campus, looking up at the winter sky. Somewhere, 3i Atlas had left the sun's sphere of influence, entering the cold darkness between the stars. No more blue light, just an absolute void, a perfect silence. But in that silence, science had learned something else. Not all answers lie in the data, and not all unknowns need to be feared. With Loeb's scale, Avi Loeb left not just a measurement system, but a philosophy that in the journey of understanding the universe, humility is not a weakness, but the most powerful tool of wisdom. As 3I Atlas left the sun, every station thought the story was over. No more blue light, no more orbital pattern visible on radar. But then, in the seemingly silent background of radio noise, a faint series of oscillations appeared. Every 1,420 megahertz, a steady rhythm that never completely disappeared. At first, it was thought to be noise. But when compared with the old data from the WOW signal from 1977, the waveform matched perfectly. A single frequency, a fixed pattern of transmission, and a decaying intensity that followed the laws of interstellar propagation. At this point, Avi Loeb put forward a bold hypothesis. Maybe 3I Atlas was not the source, but simply a relay station in a much older communication system. We could be listening to a network that once spanned the entire galaxy, he said, a structure designed to continue forever, even though its creators are no longer around. The hypothesis is called the Ancient Communication Network. If a civilization had the technical know-how, Loeb says, they could have built a network of thousands of devices like 3I Atlas, drifting between star systems, relaying data via light, using energy from stellar radiation as a stable power source. When one node in the network goes down, the remaining nodes remain active, like beacons in the night, a self-healing network, without human operators. In the Harvard team's simulation, such an interstellar system could survive for millions of years. If each station had the ability to chemically repair its structure, which 3I Atlas appears to be doing, the nickel carbonyl could act as a protective layer, allowing the metallic structure to heal itself when it is eroded by cosmic dust. The blue light emitted isn't just for navigation. It could also be a network calibration signal, a way for stations to check that they're still in the loop. Measurements show that 3I Atlas emits radiation at a rhythm that isn't perfectly regular. Every few hours, the frequency shifts by 1,000th of a megahertz, as if adjusting to catch a faint signal from far away. If it's not a natural error, it's possible that it's listening back to something, an original signal that originated tens of light years away. One ESA researcher described the phenomenon this way. 3I Atlas behaves like a signal repeater. It doesn't send out its own messages. It just amplifies and relays what it receives. And that's what makes Loeb's theory so terrifying. Because if 3I Atlas is just one small node in that system, then there could be hundreds of other stations still operating, scattered throughout the galaxy, each waiting to receive and send back data without knowing who the receiver is. Loeb said in an interview with Scientific American, "The amazing thing is not the signal, but the existence of a system that still works, after its creator may have been gone for millions of years." To him, this is not just evidence of technology, but of a will that has endured through time. A civilization ancient enough to know that all visible things disintegrate, so they left behind the only thing that could survive: transmission. A network still works, but no one is on the other end. A signal still repeats, though no one is left to answer. Avi Loeb concluded in a panel discussion, 3I Atlas may be proof that the universe once had intelligence, but that intelligence is now only a technological echo. We may not be the first to listen, but rather latecomers, hearing the echoes of a conversation long gone. After the Ancient Communication Network hypothesis was published, independent scientific teams around the world began a bold effort, retracing the signal's path. If 3I Atlas was just an intermediary station, then the real source must lie somewhere else, farther, deeper, where light itself would take centuries to reach. Radio stations in Australia, Chile, and South Africa worked together, building a three-dimensional map of the 1,420 MHz frequency, tracking the phase delay between the oscillations. As the data were superimposed, a single source emerged: the region of space between Sagittarius and Corona Australis. An empty region, no bright stars, no dense gas, just the dark space between the galactic arms. But from that dark region, weak reflections, similar to 3I Atlas, were recorded repeating at regular intervals. Each reflection got a little weaker, like an echo spreading out through endless corridors. An ESA engineer said, "Nobody can be sure it's natural. It's more like a network of relay stations than an astronomical phenomenon." As the propagation model was refined, experts discovered a curious detail. The average distance between reflections was always about 11 light years, a round number that seemed absurd. No natural structure in the universe kept such a regular rhythm in open space. If it was a coincidence, it was a coincidence repeated thousands of times. At Harvard, Avi Loeb calls it invisible architectural patterns. This, he said, was a sign of an interstellar energy routing system, an automated transmitter-receiver network built to maintain communication between points in space, much like how geostationary satellites connect Earth today. Comparing the propagation times of the signals, the researchers found that the delay between the first reflection and 3I Atlas was equivalent to a distance of about 60 light years. That means the original source, the first node in the chain, was located on the edge of the Milky Way galaxy. Several stations in Japan and Hawaii later recorded weaker signals at the same frequency of 1,420 megahertzes, but out of phase by exactly 0.002 seconds, like a data packet delayed as it passed through multiple relays. A physicist at Kyoto wrote in the report, "The structure of the signal does not just carry energy, it bears traces of its transmission through multiple intermediate layers. That is, 3I Atlas may not be the sender, but a relay point in the transmission chain." Avi Loeb describes this with a simple image. If you throw a stone down a well, the echo returns not from the stone, but from the walls that have retained its sound. He suggests it is possible that the system was activated millions of years ago, when the civilization that created it still existed. Over time, all that remains are automated light stations, continuing to relay a signal that no longer has a listener. A study at Caltech supports this hypothesis. The simulation team shows that if a civilization wants to send a signal hundreds of light years away, the most efficient way is not to broadcast once, but to build a network of relays. Each station maintains power, corrects phase errors, and amplifies the signal before sending it on. If 3I Atlas is one of those stations, it has been doing its job for millions of years, without a single human hand. Avi Loeb calls this posthuman technology, technology that survives after its creator is gone. He writes, "Such a system does not require intelligence to operate. It requires only a structure that is durable, and an idea strong enough to survive the passage of time." If this is true, then 3I Atlas is not just an object, but a memory that is being replayed. An endless looping signal, like the heartbeat of the universe, still beating, even though the body is gone. Further analysis showed that the signals from 3I Atlas were not just simple energy waves. When processed more closely, they revealed an organized structure, an incredibly precise repeating cycle, as if hidden within it was a data storage system. scientists realized that the amplitude of the signal did not vary randomly like natural radiation, but followed a certain rule. Each emitted cycle had a small pause, like a punctuation mark between lines of information. Avi Loeb suggests that this could be a non-linguistic encoding, a form of energy memory that an automated system uses to keep track of what it has experienced. According to him, 3I Atlas could be recording the fluctuations of the universe, converting them into waves and storing them in its own energy field. This hypothesis opens up a completely new perspective. Rather than a messenger, 3I Atlas could be a living archive, an ancient observatory designed to record every change that takes place in the space it passes through. Each time its blue light oscillates, energy is charged, processed, and transmitted like a slow breath of a machine that is still running after millions of years. Researchers have dubbed this phenomenon cosmic memory, a system that cannot speak but can remember in frequency and light. If there were hundreds of stations like 3I Atlas scattered among the stars, they could collectively hold a vast record of the galaxy's history. What has scientists silent is not the data, but its meaning. An object could act as part of the collective memory of the universe. It's no longer a story about technology, it's about continuity. Avi Loeb writes in his report, "If 3I Atlas is a fragment of the ancient network, then each time it glows, a memory is recorded. No one hears it, but the universe remembers." In this view, 3I Atlas becomes a form of intelligence that has become static. It does not evolve, it does not converse, it has only one function: to record. A process that exists without an observer, a way for information to be preserved even when life disappears. Loeb concludes in an internal discussion. We may be witnessing a demonstration of what philosophy has always predicted, that the universe does not forget. When the final analysis was completed, Avi Loeb no longer saw 3I Atlas as a single object, but as part of a much larger structure, a system that had a purpose and was somehow still carrying out that mission. In his summary to NASA and ESA, he wrote, "If the ancient communication network hypothesis is correct, then 3I Atlas is evidence of a technology that has surpassed its creators. It not only exists, it still functions." According to Loeb, it is possible that in the distant past, a civilization had advanced to the point that they no longer needed to exist in biological form. Instead of expanding their territory or developing their lives, they chose to store their knowledge in matter, creating memory stations like 3I Atlas, each carrying a piece of the cosmic memory, a living grain of data, drifting forever in interstellar space. When their lives ended, the system continued to operate persistently, without instructions, with only one command: to maintain the connection. The signals humans receive today could be the information streams left over from that period, part of a network that never stopped working. A researcher in Geneva described, "It feels strange. It's as if we're reading the diary of a dead civilization,